Okay. So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and attending our 2022 Aquatic Weed Watcher workshop. The main purpose of this workshop is to get you familiar with how to identify and report priority invasive aquatic plants in the Tualatin watershed. We will briefly cover control options and are happy to follow up with you after the presentation to answer any species-specific control questions. So tonight, so my name is Tyler Pedersen. I'm the invasive species coordinator at the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District.
I'm Olivia, invasive species technician at Tualatin SWCD.
And I'm Eli, and I'm also an invasive species technician at Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District.
And so our service area is in the Tualatin River watershed. And some of you might already know this, but a watershed is an area of land where all the water that is under it or drains off of it goes into the same place. Everyone lives in a watershed and has a significant impact on the watershed in which one lives. Watersheds are dictated by topography, by the contours of the land, and water is taking the path of least resistance from a high point to a low point. Our Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District was founded in 1955, and we're one of 45 SWCDs in Oregon. Our service area is in Washington County, as you can see there in the top left there. And working with residents, we help our community implement sustainable solutions to conserve and enhance natural resources. And we provide technical assistance, financial assistance, and education programs. For our invasive species program, we control and survey target species, increase public awareness, and collaborate with partners and residents to prevent the spread of invasive species. Our program was established in 2018, and we've grown to 1 coordinator and 2 technicians. We primarily, we control and survey for invasive plants, and we're starting to do some work on trapping and removing invasive turtles in coordination with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. The different program elements that we have, we offer technical assistance to control common weeds. We survey and control early detection and rapid response, or EDRR, weeds through the Tualatin River watershed. We have a tool library of weed wrenches that we loan out to landowners throughout the county. And we offer these weed watcher workshops for land managers and communities. And this is a new this was rebranded in 2020. But this is the Tualatin Watershed Invasive Species Team, or TWIST, Defenders of Habitat. This is a partnership between residents, volunteers, nonprofits, and government agencies. Volunteers and staff look for and report EDRR species in the Tualatin River watershed. By taking this workshop, you are now a part of our team.
Okay, to sort of help give some context on what we mean with invasive species, we wanted to just quickly define what we mean when we say invasive. And an invasive species is a non-native pest, whether that's a plant, an animal, or an insect that damages our local habitats, our native habitats, our biodiversity, potentially human health, and infrastructure along with that, whether that's our roads and bridges or our agricultural settings. So as a quick demonstration of what invasive species can do when they're not managed, there's this infographic here where on the far left we see a healthy ecosystem where we see lots of native plants, pollinators that we're familiar with, bees and butterflies, and our friendly ducks, and it's a healthy ecosystem. But soon on the next slide, or the next, or excuse me, sorry, not the next slide, but the next panel, we have an invasive species arrive. There's a new one, and it's present, and at its initial arrival, it's not causing too much damage. It's just a new guest, and then as you let it persist, there's more and more, and we start to see pollinators and our animals and native vegetation disappear, and at the very end we can start to see it causes damage to our buildings and our roads. So it's very important that we keep an eye out for these invasive species and manage them. Earlier, Tyler mentioned that we control early detection and rapid response weeds. And early detection and rapid response weeds are plants that fall into a certain category of management where they are at a level where we could still potentially control the populations or eradicate them entirely, or they're plants that haven't arrived to our area yet. So there are 4 phases, and the first phase is prevention. So a species has not arrived to our area, but we know that it could be potentially invasive. So we want to do as much as we can to make sure that it never arrives. And some actions that we can take to do that are cleaning our shoes, our equipment when we go out into the field, our vehicles if we're driving in new areas, or if we're taking our boats out and we're in a new water system, maybe in another state or in a different county where a plant is present. When we come back here, we want to make sure everything is cleaned out so we aren't potentially being a vector for that species to arrive. The second phase is if a species has arrived and it is maybe a first sighting or the first few sightings. And in this part, we are learning how to identify those weeds. We're trying to spread as much information about what those weeds look like. A workshop like tonight is a great example of some strategies that we can do. And in this detection phase, we are trying to report every sighting that we have. And from those reports, professionals can survey and map those infestations. And at the same time, they can remove those invasive species using the best management practices that are known, and they can properly dispose of those weeds. And at this time, we can also research different control options, so we aren't relying on one particular strategy. We can sort of have a whole array of options of how to get rid of these pests. Phase 3 and 4 of an early detection and rapid response plan are when the species has been here for a little bit. Maybe we were behind on a first identification, or time has just gone on and the plant is particularly vigorous and has been able to spread quickly. And a plant may end up in the third phase where it is containment, and agencies are coordinating their efforts to prevent the spread of the infestation, and they continue to remove those invasive species. But along that time to manage and the cost of management starts to increase. And the fourth and final phase of an EDRR plant, where you might not even consider it EDRR anymore, is when a plant has been established for a very long time and the cost and time is very, very expensive. So you need to prioritize economic and ecological areas that might be impacted by this plant and only control that. And complete removal is no longer feasible. So a good example of what might be in the fourth phase of EDRR would be blackberry. And another way to demonstrate this, these phases are the stages of infestation. This graph shows those times where prevention is feasible when the species is absent, or maybe there is only one known population in our county or our watershed. And as time goes on, you move into times where eradication is still feasible, and the plant might be just localized to a few areas. And as you go along the axis, as time goes, so too does the cost of managing that plant. And our program particularly tries to focus on invasive species in the early detection phase at the far left. detecting noxious weeds early helps to keep them from reaching those levels, which we can't control them anymore. And oftentimes that early detection occurs when an invasive species is detected in an area before it has a chance to explode in population over an area. So a good plant, one that we're managing right now, would be puncture vine in Washington County. There are just a few localized populations, and we really have a good chance to eradicate this. So we've been pouring a lot more time and effort into a plant like this versus plants like blackberry, ivy, holly, and hawthorns. This infographic here is the integrated pest management pyramid. It is a demonstration of the different control methods that are used to control invasive plants. So cost and time to control invasive species increases as you climb up this pyramid, which methods you choose to control. Prevention, the largest of this pyramid, are those practices like I was explaining earlier of brushing your boots and maybe not composting any invasive plant fragments that you have, because compost can be a great vector of spreading plant material. And this also includes the educational aspect that we're doing tonight of teaching people what these plants look like and how to identify them if you are out and about. The next control method would be cultural and sanitation. So plant selection would be one cultural control. Maybe there is a really popular ornamental species out there that is a potential invasive species. You can choose to plant a native plant instead. And another control method might be prescribed burning or cover crops to make sure that weeds don't get a chance to settle into your ag land. Or habitat restoration practices that limit the ability for plants to spread is another cultural control method. So if you have a bunch of blackberry in your backyard and you choose to plant trees amongst it to shade it out, that would be a cultural control method. The next, which increases in time and cost, would be physical or mechanical methods for controlling these plants. You know, you're physically pulling them out by hand or using a weed wrench, or you're using equipment to mow, weed whack, or till your soil to make sure those weeds aren't arriving. Next is biological control. So using insects or fungus that are natural enemies of the particular pest that we're concerned about from that pest native range to feed on it and bring those populations down to either eradicated or an acceptable level where they're not dominating our ecosystems. And it's important to note that for any biological control that's used, before they're employed, extensive research is done beforehand so that no off-target damage to other native species occurs. And finally, at the very top of the pyramid is using a chemical method to control these plants. So where herbicides are used, and it's only used when necessary and all other options have been exhausted, because it is the most time-intensive and expensive way to control these invasive species. And we're going to be talking a lot about different aquatic plants tonight, and we're going to be using some different terminology to define these plants and classify them. And there are three general classifications of aquatic vegetation that we're going to use tonight. Plant could be emerged, it could be submersed, or it could be floating. And an emergent plant are those that are rooted in water saturated or really inundated soil. And the majority of that plant material grows above the water surface. So some examples of emergent plants would be purple loosestrife, or ones that we're familiar with like cattail or sedges. A submersed plant is where the majority of that material grows below the water surface. And there are two types of submersed vegetation where that plant can be bottom rooted, so its stems and its roots extend all the way down through that water and into the bottom of that system, or it could be free floating in the water. And some examples of submersed plants would be hydrilla, parrot feather, or milfoil, some of the species we're going to be talking about later. And finally, There are floating aquatic vegetation where the plant leaves or the entire plant structure floats on the water surface. And those plants might be anchored to substrate or they might not. And some examples of that are yellow floating heart or water hyacinth, or more commonly that we see all the time is duckweed.
Okay, the first species we are going to talk about is woody knotweed. Woody knotweed is important because it threatens native plant species and biodiversity. In the springtime, its rapid growth can suppress and kill native species. It often grows in dense stands where it blocks sunlight needed for other herbaceous understory growth. The rhizomes and root systems are very deep and extensive, and the dead stems continue to add thatch, suppressing new germinants. The native herbivores do not eat it, and so it does not provide good habitat for them. Along our waterways, it can displace native streamside species, leading to more erosion, the loss of habitat in riparian zones, and it can even clog small waterways and build sediment. For people, it can cause issues in construction sites. The removal of it can be very expensive. It can grow straight through cement and asphalt, even when buried 3 feet or more. And it can displace foundations and tear through decks. What to look for? Knotweed is an emergent perennial. There are actually 4 species of knotweed in Oregon. There's Japanese knotweed, giant knotweed, hybrid knotweed, which is both Japanese and giant hybridizing together, and Himalayan knotweed, though this one is less common than the other 3. It can grow 5 to 15 feet tall, depending on the species, and it forms clumps around the root crown from previous years. The flowers are small and clustered white or greenish, and they're often clustered near the ends of the stems. The stems are upright and almost bamboo-like, except for they're hollow. They start out green, or they start out reddish, and then as they mature, they turn a nicer green, as you can kind of see in the photo on the bottom right, where the stem is, where the flowers are, is a light green. And the past year's dead stems are often visible around the new growth. It's best to look for this species when the stems begin to sprout in the late spring, and when warmer temperatures lead to earlier sprout times, you might find it earlier. It's easiest to identify in the summer and fall when the flowers are in bloom and the stems have reached peak height. Where to look for this species? It is extremely hardy and can be found in a variety of habitats. It's commonly seen in riparian zones, such as streams and rivers, but it can also be found on disturbed areas along roads, forests, landscaped areas, and upland sites. If you see this plant, we would ask that you report it anywhere in Washington County, and at the end of this presentation, we'll go over how to report these species. Knotweed spreads through fragmentation. What this means is small stem pieces, as small as a ½ inch, can form new colonies. So if it's broken up or mowed, every little ½ inch piece could go on to create a whole new population. As the rhizomes develop, they can spread up to 65 feet from the plant, starting new populations. Floods can sweep plants into rivers and creeks and carry them downstream. Fill dirt with fragments moved to new locations. And this is a plant that you do not want to put any piece of in your yard debris bin that goes out to the street, or if you have a home compost bin, because it will likely sprout and create a whole new population to deal with. For this plant, it's not known if the seeds here in the US can reproduce, but the seeds in its native land can remain viable for 15 years, and the seeds are winged and disperse farther away, which allows them to disperse farther away from the parent plant. For the knotweed leaf shape, here you can see the giant knotweed has very large leaves. The hybrid knotweed is a medium, and then the Japanese knotweed is smaller. So you can see that the hybrid can be anywhere in between the giant knotweed size and the Japanese knotweed. The hybrid knotweed can sometimes also be called Bohemian knotweed, and it can vary in height or leaf shape depending on the degree of hybridization, whether it leans towards giant or Japanese. So they may have a more heart-shaped or blunt leaves and may have pointed or rounded tips. The leaves on knotweed are alternate with smooth edges and can vary in size, with giant knotweed being 6 to 15 inches long and Japanese knotweed being 3 to 6 inches long. There is a native lookalike that you might get confused about while you're out paddling, and that is red osier dogwood. This native lookalike also has white clustered flowers. It shares similar shrubby stature and also spreads along waterways via underground rhizomes. The difference is that dogwood has opposite leaves while knotweed has alternating leaves. And dogwood has a woody stem that's not hollow. The leaves are not heart-shaped, and the stems are red in winter, and the plant regrows on the same stems from the year before. The next plant that we'll be on the lookout for along the Tualatin River on Saturday, and this one we've seen along some of these stretches before, so it's likely that we will see it, is purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife was originally from Europe and brought over as an ornamental. It threatens to produce enormous stands in shallow water, where it outcompetes and displaces native riparian species. It decreases songbird and waterfowl production. It can slow rivers flow and increase sedimentation, which negatively impacts juvenile salmon habitat. It can promote algal blooms. It reduces dissolved oxygen and can clog irrigation. This also creates perfect habitat for mosquito breeding. The mature plants can produce 2.7 million seeds every year. These seeds can then float downstream, infesting slow-moving waters, though it does not colonize faster-moving water. The seeds can hitchhike on birds, boats, boots, and clothing, but they can also blow in the wind. What to look for? This is an herbaceous emergent perennial that forms clumps that can be up to 10 feet tall. The flowers are pink to purple and are on a 1 foot long spike at the top of the plant. The spikes can also grow on some of the side branches. The leaves are mostly opposite or whorled. So it's whorled meaning that it's almost a stair step around the stem. And they're lance shaped and can be 2 to 4 inches long, while the stems are square. It's easiest to look for this plant in spring through summer when it flowers in June and August. So we will likely see some of this on Saturday. It prefers moist soils with sunny conditions, but it can grow along roadsides, in ditches, wetlands, and any slow-moving stream bed. We're asking to have people report this plant if it's found anywhere in Washington County where it's in a natural area or near water. There are several purple loosestrife lookalikes that are both native. So Spirea here in the center has similar looking flowers, but they also grow on long spikes, but the flowers are a lot more clumped together and almost fuzzy looking. They both grow in wetlands and moist soils, though Spirea does not have a square stem. It has a very woody stem that it will grow back on the following year. And they both lose their leaves, but the Spirea comes back on the same branches. For fireweed, the height is about the same and the leaf shape, and it has purple flowers, but it can also have longer stalks of flowers at the end, and it lacks shrubbiness or any side branches, and the flower clusters are not as dense. You will likely see spirea on our boat trip on Saturday too, and we may come across some fireweed. There are 2 biocontrol species that are found in Oregon and released. These biocontrol species include the loosestrife root weevil and the black-margined loosestrife beetle. The hylobius or root weevil lays eggs near the roots, and the larvae mine into the roots and feed on the tissue for 2 years. In July and August, the mature larvae become adults and move on to find new infestation. The black-margined loosestrife beetle lay eggs on the stem. The larvae feed on the leaves, stems, and buds, and after about 6 weeks, the larvae mature and disperse to new patches. The next species is parrot feather. It's originally from South America and was introduced to North America via the aquarium trade. It threatens to infest areas where it can completely cover entire water bodies and smother out native aquatic species. It can also block slow-moving waterways and increase sedimentation and create mosquito breeding habitat. It spreads by stem fragments, and it does not produce seed because you need both female and male plants, though female plants are the only ones present in Oregon. So those little fragments are the only way it spreads, where they detach and drift downstream, or they can hitch a ride on waterfowl or boats. There are several large infestations in Washington County, and it is widespread throughout Western Oregon. We're asking you to report this anywhere in Oregon. For this plant, you're going to look for a submerged aquatic perennial with stems that can grow 5 feet long and emerge 1 foot out of the water, almost looking like little pine trees. The leaves are whorled and feather looking with 20 to 30 small lobes per leaf and 4 to 6 per node. The flowers are small and translucent, so you likely won't see those. The stems can also creep up onto land up to 3 feet. It's easiest to see in July through September when the water recedes and exposes the stems. It's often found in slow-moving or non-moving water, lakes, ponds, and streams and back channels. We likely will not find this plant on Saturday. The next one is yellow floating heart. This was historically cultivated as a pond ornamental. It grows in dense stands that can decrease native plant and animal diversity and impede flow in irrigation canals. Also can limit recreation and increase mosquito populations. It is a priority species for eradication in Oregon, so please report this anywhere you see it. What to look for? It is an aquatic floating perennial. It roots at the lake or pond bottom with up to 13-foot long stems and can be known to cover entire water bodies. The leaves are floating, heart-shaped and lily pad-like and 1 to 6 inches across. The underside of the leaf are purple tinted, which is a key distinguishing feature between yellow floating heart and our native pond lily. The flowers are yellow and comprised of 5 fringed petals that rise 1 to 3 inches out of the water. It spreads by rhizome, stolons, or stem fragments that can move downstream with the current. The seeds have little hairs that can stick to waterfowl and boats. When to look? The leaves are visible on the water surface from April to October, and the flowers bloom May to October. Although interestingly, individual flowers of this plant only bloom for a single day. This is often found in slow or non-moving water bodies, such as lakes, back channels, ponds, and very slow-moving streams. Here you can see our native pond lily that has much larger leaves and a very different looking flower. In that center photo, you can see it, the seed pod of our yellow pond lily, and in the bottom right, you can see the flower, and The flower doesn't open any more than what you can see there. So they're pretty easy to distinguish from the fringed to this type of flower. And the leaves of our native yellow pond lily are much larger, 2 to 3 times larger than the yellow floating heart. The next species is Eurasian watermilfoil. The mats that form can clog irrigation ditches, lakes, and ponds, where it can impede recreationists from accessing many bodies of water. It competes with native aquatic species for light, nutrients, and degrades fish habitat. There are limited infestations in Western Oregon and the Columbia Plateau region, so we're asking you to report this anywhere in Oregon. What to look for? It has similar appearance to parrot feather, though Eurasian watermilfoil leaves do not grow above the water, but its flowering stems will just barely breach the water surface to bloom. It's a perennial submerged bottom-rooted species that can form mats near the water surface, but under the surface. The stems are brown to whitish pink and can reach 12 feet long. It can also fragment and reroot to produce additional plants. The leaves are in whorls of 4 around the stem that are less than 2 inches long. They are feather-like and deeply divided into 14 to 24 slender segments on each side of the axis. So you can see in that right photo, each of those divided little leaves as you would. The flowers bloom on an immersed spike that grows erect from the water. It can have 8-inch long stems with 4-petaled flowers that grow in a whorl of 4 around the spike. It blooms in June through September. It's easiest to look for this in late summer when water levels are low, or from June to September when flowering spikes are above the water surface. You're looking for matted stems that are on top of the mud or in shallow water. It is often found in slow-moving streams or rivers and ponds or lakes, and in shallow pond margins in the urban areas. And it can be common in Western Oregon.
Okay, the next aquatic invasive species I'm gonna be talking about is called Brazilian elodea. And this aquatic invasive is important to control because elodea forms mats that block the sunlight from penetrating deeper into deeper water, which alters native biodiversity. It also impedes water flow in streams and irrigation canals and affects recreation by limiting boat access and fishing opportunities. We're asking people to report this if they find it anywhere in Oregon. What to look for? So this is a submerged perennial plant that grows in water from 7 to 8 feet deep. The stems can grow up to 18 feet long and form dense mats that float on the water surface. The leaves are arranged in whorls of 4 to 8, 4 being the most typical, around the stem with dark green and parallel veins. It has smooth leaf margins. And the flowers are white with 3 petals that grow on the stems above the water. When to look? Usually you can keep an eye out for it in the warm summer months when the water levels have receded. Where to look? Usually in slow-moving rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds. Elodea can be found in every county in Western Oregon because of aquarium dumping. So there is a lookalike species, it's a native, called Canadian waterweed. And the differences between the two are that the Brazilian elodea has 4 or more leaves per whorl and is larger with longer leaves. And the Canadian waterweed on the right there has 3 leaves per whorl. The next aquatic invasive I'm going to talk about is called hydrilla. And this one is important to control because infestations can quickly overwhelm native aquatic ecosystems with rapid growth. This plant can change resource availability and lower dissolved oxygen levels. It can adversely affect fish habitat by changing the nutrient load, and it impedes public waterways for boaters and swimmers. We're asking people to report this if found anywhere in Oregon. Hydrilla hasn't been reported in Oregon yet, and infestations have been recorded in Washington and California. What to look for? This is a submerged perennial plant that grows from rhizomes that creep through the sediment. The stems can grow up to 25 feet long and may detach from sediment and form large floating mats. The leaves are small, translucent green, and grow in whorls of 3 to 6, with 5 being the most common. It's similar in appearance to Elodea, and it distinguished from Elodea by serrated leaf margins, buds, and whorls of 5 instead of 4. The flowers, some plants have both male and female flowers, and some only have one sex. Both flowers have 6 petals. The female flowers float on top of the water and have translucent white petals. The male flowers grow above the base of the leaves and have green petals. When to look, you can spot this during the summer months when the water is lower and the plant matter is at its peak. Where to look, this survives well in polluted waters. It grows in waters up to 10 meters deep. It likes slow-moving streams, rivers, ponds, or lakes, and it can actually survive in water with up to 7% salinity, like you'd find in estuaries. The next aquatic invasive is called water hyacinth. This one is important to control because infestations can completely cover the water surface, blocking light for submerged plants. It impedes waterfowl and other wildlife from using any bodies of water. Large infestations make recreating in public waters impossible, and infestations provide prime mosquito breeding habitat. We want you to report this if you find it anywhere in Oregon. What to look for, this is a perennial floating plant that can grow up to 3 feet tall from the water surface. The leaves are round, kidney-shaped, spongy, and stand erect, growing from a floating bulb in a spiral formation. The older leaves can fall off and produce stolons, or horizontal and creeping plant stems. The flowers, there's 6-petal flower spikes that grow erect from the center of the plant, producing 8 to 15 flowers that vary in color from lavender to pink. When to look, you'll usually see this in midsummer when the plant is at its peak height. Where to look, you'll see it on rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds, specifically areas that may be sheltered from cold weather. And in the plant nursery industry, this may be sold under a different name, and they may have differently colored flowers or different cultivars. The next aquatic invasive I'm going to talk about is called South American sponge plant. This one is important to control because infestations can limit the amount of sunlight that reaches into the water, which affects the native aquatic vegetation. The changes, this plant can change habitat structure by outcompeting native species. Dense infestations can affect navigation and recreational use of public waters, and it likely reduces oxygen levels in aquatic habitats. We're asking for you to report this if you find it anywhere in Oregon. No infestations have been identified in Oregon yet. There have been some infestations on the Sacramento River in California, where it's been spread by waterfowl. What to look for? This is a perennial herb that can either be free floating or rooted in mud. The leaves float and others grow erect. They're 1 to 2 inches long and egg-shaped with spongy tissue on the underside of the floating leaves. The flowers, the male and female flowers are on the same plant. The male flowers are very small, green, and have up to 12 petals, and the female flowers lack petals. The stems, the rosettes are connected by a stolon, and the stolons can fragment and produce new plants. When to look, you'll usually see it in the spring or summer. Where to look, usually it'll grow in sunny, slow-moving streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, ditches, and wetlands. It also prefers shallow water and can tolerate mild salinity. The next aquatic invasive is called South American water primrose. This plant is important to control because dense mats will completely overwhelm aquatic communities. It slows water flow and increases stagnation, and it decreases habitat quality for fish and other aquatic wildlife. We're asking you to report this if you find it anywhere in Oregon. Right now, large populations exist south of us on the Willamette River and adjacent river systems. So it's definitely not something we want to get started here in the Tualatin Basin. What to look for? This is a floating perennial species. The leaves have two forms. The leaves growing on horizontal stems are more round or egg-shaped. The leaves growing on erect flowering stems are more lance-shaped, and they have reddish leaf veins. The flowers are yellow with 5 to 6 petals, and they bloom from July through early September. The stems are horizontal creeping stems that float on the water surface. The flowering stems grow erect, and the stems can fragment and sprout roots at nodes, creating new plants. When to look, the leaves are visible from April to October, and it's easiest to spot when it's in bloom from July through early September. Where to look? Usually you'll find it in wetlands, marshes, irrigation canals, ditches, and ponds or lake margins. And there is a native lookalike, you can see there on the right, that's called water primrose or marsh seed box. And the main differences between the two are that the South American water primrose has alternately arranged leaves and bright yellow flowers. On the other hand, the native water primrose has opposite arranged leaves and small greenish flowers. Water lettuce is the next aquatic invasive plant, and this one's important to control because infestations will cover entire water bodies. They'll negatively affect aquatic habitats by blocking light. It harbors prime mosquito breeding habitat, and it increases nutrient levels. We're asking you to report this if you find it anywhere in Oregon. It hasn't yet been reported in Oregon, so it's something to keep an eye out for. And it is sold as an aquarium plant. What to look for? This is a perennial floating rosette or leaf. The roots hang from the base of a rosette, and the rosette produces stolons, or the horizontal stems, creating large connected mats. The leaves are pale green with thick, soft, parallel veins that are 5 to 6 inches long and covered in small hairs. Flowers are small, light green, hidden in the center of the rosette, and it produces small green berries. When to look? The leaves are usually visible from spring to summer months. Where to look? You'll usually find it growing in stagnant water, in ponds, lakes, irrigation ditches, and in Oregon, it would be found in places sheltered from the frost. Common frogbit is the next aquatic invasive. Why this is important to control? This does not provide food for native wildlife. It blocks light from penetrating the water column, which changes the habitat functions by decreasing dissolved oxygen and nutrient levels. It provides mosquito breeding habitat. We're asking people to report this if found anywhere in Oregon. It has not yet been reported in Oregon, but it has been reported in Washington and parts of Canada. What to look for? This is a free-floating perennial plant. It grows as rosettes connected by stolons. It produces buds that overwinter in the substrate. The leaves are round, lily pad-like, about 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches long, with dark purple underneath, and they're floating. The flowers are white with 3 petals, and they grow on erect stems above the water surface. When to look? The leaves will appear in May. The flowers can be seen from July to August. Where to look? This prefers slow-moving or stagnant water in ponds, lakes, streams, rivers, and wetland margins. Okay, the last aquatic invasive plant that I'm going to be talking about, this is the fragrant water lily. This one's important to control because the populations can form dense mats which crowd out native species. The decomposition in the fall leads to increased dissolved oxygen consumption. With the bacteria that break down the plant will use up the oxygen, which can lower the amount of oxygen in the water for aquatic wildlife. And then excessive richness of nutrients in the water. These excessive nutrients can cause aquatic plant infestations to worsen, which can then degrade habitat and water quality. We're asking you to report this if you find it anywhere in Washington County. What to look for? This is a floating aquatic plant with large, fragrant white or pink flowers and flat, round, floating leaves. The leaves have long stems and are bright green above and reddish or purplish underneath. Almost round leaves are narrowly and deeply cut to the center where the stem is attached. When to look? This plant blooms between the months of March and October. The flowers open in early morning and close around noon. Where to look? You'll find this growing in ponds, lakes, and slow-moving streams, and it tolerates full sun to shade.
Okay, the last group of invasive pests that we're going to talk about tonight are going to be away from plants and more into our more mobile creatures, the mollusks and frogs and other amphibians. And the first one of that group are zebra mussels. And these mussels attach themselves to our infrastructure and they clog particularly pipelines, dams, and water intakes. And with no natural predators, their populations can completely outcompete other filter feeders for resources, and they really just don't have any checks and balances on their population level, so they can really explode to super high amounts. And you'll find them year round, but during cold periods, they can burrow into to mud and to protect themselves. And you'll find them in freshwater lakes, rivers, canals, and ponds. And this is a species, along with the other mollusk, that is oftentimes mostly transported by trailered boats. So there are infestations elsewhere in the United States, and they have moved to different major water systems through commercial or recreational boats. To identify zebra mussels, you're looking for a small triangular shape, and their shells have yellow and brown stripes, and or excuse me, I'm sorry, yellow and brown stripes, and they're going to be smaller than the next mussel that I'll talk about. And the next one is the quagga mussel, and quagga mussels are like zebra mussels. They're federally listed, so if you ever observe them in Washington County or Oregon or anywhere else in the rest of the country, it's a good idea to report that species so that that population can be known about. And it's important to report these species because, like the zebra mussels, they clog our infrastructure and they also have no natural predators, so their populations as well can explode pretty quickly. And you're going to look for that same small triangular shape and they have yellow and brown stripes, but this mussel in particular can be distinguished from zebra mussels in that the shell is a much paler color. And you can also look for these year-round in freshwater lakes and those rivers, canals, and ponds. And they're also transported the same way. The next species are mud snails. And mud snails are really small, tiny creatures that displace other animals, which are food for are food sources for salmon, steelhead, and trout. So the presence of these snails can really impact the population levels of those fish. And this is a federally listed invasive. So if you see this as well, make sure to report it right away and get as much information as you can on it. It's a very, very tiny snail. You can see in that image for scale, that's a dime. And when you look closely, there are these tiny right-hand coiled or right-hand turning whorls around the shell, and there's 5 to 6 of them. And the color ranges from anywhere between light and dark brown. You can find these year-round, and they'll burrow into mud as well during cold and dry conditions. And you want to look for these mud snails in brackish or freshwater lakes, and they can often be found on mud, rocks, plants, and wood. They're attached to those. And like the others, they're transported by trailered boats. Snapping turtles are native to other parts of the US, but they are invasive in the Pacific Northwest. They're invasive in Washington County. And so since it's native to other parts, it isn't federally listed, but it is illegal to buy, sell, possess, or transport any snapping turtles in the state of Oregon, as well as releasing them. So if you have one and you wanted to get rid of it, there are avenues to do that, but releasing them out into the wild isn't legal. And that's because they prey on our native fish and wildlife. And these snapping turtles in our area outcompete our native turtles for food, basking sites, and nesting sites as well. And also they might introduce new parasites or diseases to our native turtle populations that our native turtles just aren't equipped to handle. And snapping turtles inhabit warmer, still or slow moving water, such as ponds, lakes, and streams, or even rivers. And they have oval shells with jagged edges, which they widen towards the back. And the color of their shells can vary between tan, olive to black, and they can reach over a foot long in length. But one of the big key identifiers of a snapping turtle are their tails. There's a series of large triangular plates on the top of their tail. And in Washington County in particular, you can find them in areas around Fano Creek, including Summer Creek and some other ponded areas there. The next invasive turtle that exists in our area is the eastern red-eared slider turtle. And like the snapping turtle, it is native to other parts of the US, so it isn't federally listed, but the same restrictions in terms of possession and selling and releasing. It is illegal to do those things in the state of Oregon because eastern red-eared slider turtles outcompete our native turtles for those food sources, basking, and nesting spots. And again, like the snapping turtle, they can introduce those new diseases into our turtle populations. The red-eared slider is a lot different from snapping turtles. They they're a bit smaller. They can grow 6 to 6 inches long, and the underbelly of their shell is yellow, and they have yellow stripes all along their neck and legs, and they have a very distinctive red mark behind their eyes, which gives them their namesake. And they prefer freshwater lakes and wetlands with abundant basking space. And it's good to know that if you're ever looking at one, females are larger than the males, but the males have really long claws on the front of their feet. So if you ever find one and you want to know what you're looking at, those are some key characteristics. And red-eared sliders in Washington County can be found on the Tualatin River. So while we're out on Saturday, it would be a good idea to keep your eye out on good basking spots and see if you can't find a turtle that day. They're also on Dawson Creek and Fano Creek and on those surrounding smaller creeks and tributaries and ponds as well. Since we're going to talk about the invasive turtles, it's good to know what the native turtles look like, because when you're out there, they can be confusing. We have two natives, the western pond turtle and the western painted turtle. Pond turtles enjoy the same spaces as those invasive species, those lakes and rivers, but painted turtles can be found most often in much slower moving water, ponds or sloughs. The pond turtle has a dark brown to olive shell on top, and their heads and legs of the same color as well. And painted turtles have olive to green black shells on top with a yellow striped neck, head, and legs. So the painted turtle could be something that would be easily confused with the red-eared slider. If it wasn't for that red-eared mark, it might be tough to differentiate. So if you're looking from afar, having a pair of binoculars while you're out there so you can get up close visually and see if they have that mark to differentiate whether it's an invasive or a native. Another invasive species that is not present in our area as far as we know, but is confirmed in Washington, is the clawed frog. It's a federally listed frog that is incredibly damaging to our native ecosystems and biodiversity. They compete with and prey on our native species. That's an almost totally aquatic frog. It only leaves the water when forced to migrate to another pond. And it's a highly opportunistic species and can easily colonize newly created water bodies. And they reproduce and spread very rapidly, which makes it a significant conservation concern. And these frogs can often carry diseases that are harmful to our amphibians and other fish. You'll rarely find them in running streams. The clawed frog prefers warm, stagnant pools and quiet streams, thriving in temperatures from 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And you'll find the adults year-round. To help identify the clawed frog, if you're out and about and you find an adult frog, this particular species is the only frog that has those distinctive claws up front. No other frog in our area has claws, not even bullfrogs. And the skin is multicolored with blotches of greenish gray or brown on its back. And the underside of the frog is an off-white with a yellowish hue. But they do have the ability to change their appearance to match their background, becoming darker or lighter or more mottled. So they can vary in appearance. And the males are about 2 to 2.5 inches long, whereas the females are much larger, ranging to 4 and 4.5. And their head is very flat, as you can see in that top right photo, and it's got a bit of a wedge shape. So finally, we were talking a lot about invasive plant species that are in our area, but there are also a few native species in our aquatic systems that can often explode in populations or appear to be invasive. So we just wanted to give some descriptions about these native plants and let you know that they're native, and if you come across them, they don't need to be reported. And the first one would be floating pennywort. It is a floating or creeping perennial plant that produces really large colonies. The leaves of this plant are round or kidney shaped, and they're divided into all these lobes. There can be 3 to 7 of them. So those lobes can be seen in the bottom photo there. And the stalk of the leaf appears to attach in the center of it. It makes small creamy yellow flowers that grow on really short stalks off the main stem beneath the leaves. And it is a star shape with 5 petals that blooms from March to August. And the stem of this plant can fragment to reproduce new plants. So that's why it can often explode in population levels. If you have some of it and you try to yank a whole bunch out, you might end up leaving fragments behind, and it can start a whole bunch of new plants. And it's easiest to spot in late summer to early fall when the water levels recede, and maybe you might be able to get closer to the bank and actually look at those plants. And you'll find it on streams, rivers, ponds, and lake margins. But this plant can also sometimes be found in irrigation ditches. And if it's there, it might be worthwhile to move because all that material can block those intakes. Another common native that will appear invasive, especially in that bottom left photo, that's a pretty dramatic image of mosquito fern. It's a native plant and it can be mistaken as invasive. But there are two species and they form these dense mats that can sometimes impede access to recreation and alter the water flow in irrigation ditches, streams, and canals. You can find mosquito fern growing from spring until the first frost. And it's a free-floating aquatic fern that is approximately 3 centimeters long with green to dark red leaves. Its color changes as the season goes on. So early in spring, it's green. And as temperatures change, then and sunlight exposure changes, then the leaves turn more red. And this plant produces spores which overwinter and grow in spring. So if we have a really warm winter, that can lead to a really high germination rate in the spring. But if we have a cold weather winter, then we'll have smaller populations. So year to year, if you have a pond or commonly accessed one, you can see a fluctuation in those population levels.
Now we're going to talk about how to report these species. So we're asking everyone to use the Oregon Invasives hotline. Once you get to the Oregon Invasives hotline, there is a large Report Now button, and you will click that. You do not need an account. So once you click the Report Now button, it will open up a form for you to fill out. It will ask for your first name, your last name, phone number, and email. The phone number and email are just in case an invasive species expert needs to get a hold of you and ask a few more questions or get some clarifying information from you. Next, it will ask for the location. So you can see here, you can move the map, kind of like Google Maps, to where you saw the infestation, and you can drop a pin, or you can include an address here, or the nearest address, or latitude and longitude coordinates that you can get from Google. And below this that you can't see in these images is an additional box that asks for some additional information on, once we get to this address, how do we get to the population that you saw? So if you need to go, if you get to a trailhead and you need to go down the left trail and it's about 100 steps or 100 feet down there, those are helpful informations to include in that next box that was not included in that picture. Next, it will ask for the category of whatever you're reporting. So the items that are highlighted in yellow here are some of the categories that would include the plants and animals that we talked about tonight. So once you include your category, give a description of your find. If you know the name of the plant, include that. Otherwise, describe the plant that you're seeing so that someone can follow up on it. If you think you know the plant, then you'll describe it. Images, it's best to include images so that an invasive species expert can follow up on it. We ask that you submit 2 photos at a minimum, 1 photo from a distance so you can see the whole infestation or plant, and then a second photo with a close-up of the leaves, the flowers, or some more details of the critter that you're looking at. And so here are some example photos. So you can see on the left is an at a distance photo. You can see that there's a lot of green vegetation. Those might all be the same. And then on the right is a close-up of the plant that's in the lower right corner in front of the log to give us a better idea of what the plant is in that photo. And then the last section is if you have any questions for the expert who will be responding to your report. So if you have questions for the expert about turtles or any other invasive species, feel free to ask that on there, and someone will respond to any of your questions and your report through the Oregon Invasive Species Hotline, and you'll receive emails, correspondence. If it's a turtle, they likely will call you and try and get some more information. So it's best to include as much contact information as you can on that first page. And then once you're ready, you can submit your report, and someone within the next couple days will get a hold of you or respond to your hotline report on the website.
Okay, so these last few slides here, we're going to talk about prevention, which is, the most important control to try to prevent weeds or aquatic invasives from spreading. So when you go out on a hike, or you go camping or recreating in wild areas, we can pick up seeds. You can decrease your likelihood of being a vector by cleaning your boots at boot brush stations, brushing your dogs and other pets on site, and rinsing bikes and other equipment down on site. If you see an invasive plant while outdoors, you can throw it away in the trash. Do not try to compost it. Make sure collected specimens are stowed in a sealed bag to prevent their spread. And then, as always, remember to submit your report to the hotline. And then for aquatics, so when you're recreating in the water, it's best to clean your water vessels thoroughly. Check any crevices or any areas that were in contact with the water. Let it dry completely before entering new waterways. And don't let it loose. So historically, a lot of aquatic pets were released back into the wild, which has not ended well. You can see that with crayfish, invasive turtles, goldfish, carp, and bullfrogs, which can all wreak havoc on our ecosystems. If you have a pet that you don't know what to do with, you can call the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then you can reach out to us if you need additional resources. This ends our presentation for today. We'd like to thank everyone for watching, and thanks for tuning in and learning how to identify and report invasive aquatic species. We want to thank our partners for all their support. The Tualatin Riverkeepers has been really great partnering with you and being able to go out on these paddle trips and provide these workshops with your volunteers and members. And we hope to see everyone out on the river this weekend. It's going to be a hot one. We're looking forward to floating on the river and hopefully cooling off. And right now we'll take any questions either by email. You can email us or ask us now or at the paddle.
Feel free to use the raise your hand function or type your question in the chat or question and answer.
Okay, it looks like someone had a question. Jenny, asking about blue-green algae. Yeah, algae blooms are definitely concerning, and especially, toxic algae, at lakes, especially when, the weather gets hot, the water levels go down. We haven't really been involved too much with that. I know in the past, I think at Hague Lake, there was some blooms. Where else? think there might have been other areas, but it's certainly something that we're aware of.
Tyler, you'll have to unmute Mark.
Okay. How do I unmute? Let's see.
I think if you go to participants, and then the box will show up on the right and you can unmute him.
Okay, where's Mark? There we go. Okay, you can talk now.
I think you'll have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm a Tigard resident, and just over the last year, I'm seeing, ironically, mostly on Nextdoor, a lot of snapping turtle reports in Summer Lake, which is just north of me, and some of the greenways along Fano. I'm reading that I should contact ODF&W, and that they'll make arrangements. How is it working? What have you had any direct experience with people that have reported one of these yet, and had someone retrieve one? What's kind of the best thing? I suspect with the amount of time I'm out and about, sooner or later I'll find one of these things, and I'm just kind of curious what the do I just take care of it myself, or do they really want to get these things and weigh them and get some information about them?
Mark, that is a great question. So we actually just went through a training with ODF&W, and so feel free to report those on the Oregon Invasive Species Hotline. And if you are able to get your hands on one, we would love you to put it in a tub and keep it until one of us can come pick it up from you, because we do want to get measurements, figure out if it's laid eggs, and other details about the turtle. That will then be turned over to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So reporting it, and if you can get a critter, that would be great. Just put it in a tote and let us know right away, and we would be happy to come pick it up from you.
Okay, it's good to know, because I see some of the responses, from my neighbors are, this last time around, it's like, oh, so-and-so lost a tortoise. Get a hold of, Susan, it must be hers. And, and somebody else was like, oh my God, I just wanted to make sure it got across the road. And anyway, I want to have the best information possible to, to either pass along, or, even, I guess, if I'm available, it's sort of like, where are you? Let me come and help. So I'll do my best.
Yeah, and feel free to give out our contact information, or Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We are helping them to gather up turtles that have been reported or collected by citizens. So we are happy to help if we need to go and pick it up, if someone can just try and contain it. We ran out last week, and someone had picked up a red-eared slider, and so we were able to help them get it to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife that same day.
Okay, is there one of you in particular? Is there an info at email or a number? What's the best one to pass out to people?
If you use the email invasives at Tualatin SWCD, the one that's listed here, all three of us will get that. And so one of us can respond right away as soon as we see it.
Great, thank you very much, Olivia.
Mark, do you have any details for this weekend that you want to share?
Just that I'm really excited about, as always, getting out on the river, and the sort of our current summer climate regimen, is so different from last year. It'll be really interesting to see, what we spot. The last time we did this, we actually were able to bag some loosestrife, which was kind of fun to see. just the challenges of working with the steep banks on the Tualatin, and the dynamics of doing it from a kayak. It was really good. And so yeah, I'm excited to obviously not excited if we find something, but I do look forward to the opportunity, if we do find something that's practical for us as a group to minimally identify and look at, ideally possibly try to contain. Looking forward to getting out in boats, talk about all of this kind of out in the real world. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good morning.
And for all of those of you who are coming on Saturday, we will have a turtle kit from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to show you either shells or live turtles, so you can see the difference between the natives and the non-natives.
Any particular scheduling as far as when people arrive? And I know we can talk about this separately too, but kind of a sense, are we going to review some of this in person first? Are you thinking better to get kind of set up and moving first? What's your sense?
We will bring guides for everybody to have that will include most of the species that we talked about today. It won't include all of them because we didn't have a chance to get some of the additional species updated, but those are on paper that's okay to get wet, so it's easy for you to use in your kayak. We'll probably do a quick intro before we hop in the water, so feel free to show up a little bit early. So we can try and get in the water not too long after 9 o'clock, because it's going to be a hot one.
We've also got about a dozen earlier version of the weed guides that we'll have available too. My apologies for not getting that update to you earlier, Tyler, but we've definitely got those, and we'll have those available if need be.
Perfect. That would be great.
We had a question here. It says, Ben asked, so does our registration with this webinar also reserve us a spot on the boat on Saturday? I think it does, doesn't it?
Mark, do you want to answer that?
I'm looking at the roster right now. Who am I? Who should I be confirming here?
Ben.
Ben. All right. Let me. Oh, this thing is a little slow here. It's probably a little slow because. Oh goodness. Manage attendees. All right. Let me look here. Oh, sorry, this is taking so long. Orders, all right. This way I can produce the exact, so Lynn Lindgren, whoops. Luann Lorenz, Jessica Weller, Jacob Waslewski, Angie Santana, Jesselyn Santana, Guillermina Leos, Sandy Lamb Moody, Lindsay Baker, Dean Morberg. I think he isn't going to be able to make it. Kim Walsh, Tom Walsh. That's who I've got so far. So it sounds like maybe Ben needs to check in with me specifically, and we'll make sure. We've still got a couple boats available. We could also make a bring your own slot available if need be.
Perfect. That was an additional question. Jenny asked, if we bring our own boats, do we need to register?
We definitely want to know that you're coming. So ideally, yes. And let me make sure that we've got enough spots for a few more bring your own boats, just to kind of anticipate numbers and time to get launched and whatnot.
And if, so Ben says that he found the Eventbrite where he registered, where he can register. Is it best to do it that way?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.
I'll increase the availability of the bring your own by a couple of boats just to make sure people can get in.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Are there any more questions?
I have a question about another turtle question. I was recently reading about it was interesting. It was a post on a social media page by a local kayaking organization, and they were cautioning kayakers about getting too close to turtles, just to not interrupt their basking cycle, because that's such an important part of their daily kind of metabolism recharge. How much should we worry about that versus getting a good, clean identification potentially on a, I mean, if I've got binoculars, I'm confident I should be able to, get a good look and determine if it's a red-eared slider or not. Should I, out of caution, stay back if I'm not sure what it is, or is it better to, potentially disturb the turtle, but get a good solid identification on it for reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I think with turtles, I mean, some of them can be pretty skittish. Depending on, I mean, each one could be a little different, but yeah, I mean, if you're getting close to it, sometimes they'll just fall right off and go back into the water. So you might not always be able to get a better ID because they're pretty quick. But sometimes, like, doing it from afar, if you do have binoculars, might be the best strategy, because if you do get closer, they could just fall off the log and go back into the water.
Will the possible turtles we'll be looking at, will we be able to kind of get a sense, if I'm standing 10 feet away, just how difficult it is to identify? Or is it one of those things you just have to kind of develop a feel for in the field? I was on a field trip once at one of the national wildlife refuges with a there were two women who volunteered at Audubon's Care Center, and I was so impressed. We were 50 yards away from these sunning turtles, and they were just reading off which ones were what, and I was seeing a turtle. Does it just take time, or will you be able to, can we kind of walk away from the turtles you have and get a sense for what we're looking for with field marks?
It definitely takes some time to key into those identifying features. We will have little cards. Hopefully we'll have enough, but we'll have little cards that we can give you guys that you can take kayaking to help with some of the identifying features. But the snappers are probably the easiest to identify. And in the Tualatin, there are a bunch of red-eared sliders, so just keep your eyes out for that red streak. And you'll see that. Hopefully we'll have one on Saturday that you'll be able to see.
Anyone have any more questions?
If not, we will look forward to seeing you all on Saturday.
Yeah, thank you again. Great to give this presentation again, and thanks for attending, and yeah, hopefully have a good paddle on Saturday, and get to see some invasives and maybe some turtles.
Thank you. I'll see you Saturday.